I hadn't seen Frederick in almost 8 years when I ran into him at a bookstore cafe on a random Thursday afternoon. And the first thing I noticed wasn't the gray at his temples. I was standing in line, half listening to the barista explain oat milk options, when I heard someone say my name. Enrique? I hadn't heard it in that voice in years. Calm, measured, slightly deeper than most men's, like he was always choosing his words carefully. I turned around, and there he was. Frederick, my former high school literature teacher. For a second, everything felt exactly the same. My spine straightened automatically. My shoulders pulled back. I had the ridiculous urge to say, "Good afternoon, sir." Except I was 30 now, and he wasn't my teacher anymore. He looked older, obviously. His hair was shorter, a little thinner on top, but still that soft brown I remembered. The glasses were different, sleeker. He wasn't wearing a blazer like he used to in class. Just a dark sweater, sleeves pushed up, exposing forearms I definitely had not been mature enough to look at properly back then. But it was him, and when his eyes met mine I saw it. Recognition, surprise, and something else that made my stomach tighten. "Frederick," I said, and I immediately hated how breathless I sounded. He smiled slowly. "I wasn't sure it was you at first. You look different." Different. I almost laughed. When he knew me, I was 17. Skinny, awkward, hiding behind too long bangs and sarcasm. The quiet kid who wrote essays that were way too intense for his age. The one who stayed after class to argue about symbolism. Now I was broader, filled out. I had a beard. Confidence, maybe. At least I faked it better. "You don't look that different," I said. "Just more relaxed." He huffed a soft laugh. "I'm not teaching anymore." That surprised me. "You're not?" "No," he said. "I left 3 years ago." The barista called my name. I grabbed my coffee without breaking eye contact. He lifted his cup slightly. "Would you like to sit?" That hesitation, that careful phrasing. Even now, he was choosing his words around me. And I realized something unsettling in that moment. The dynamic might have changed on paper, but the memory of it hadn't gone anywhere. Still, I nodded. "Yeah, I'd like that." We sat near the window. Afternoon light cut across the table between us like a visible boundary line. For a few minutes, it was safe. Easy questions. "What have you been doing? Are you still writing? Do you still read too much Dostoevsky?" I told him I worked in publishing now. Editorial side. I told him he was partly to blame for that. He looked genuinely pleased. "That makes me happy," he said quietly. And that word, happy, hit differently coming from him. Because when I was 17, I'd lived for his approval. I don't think he ever knew that. Or maybe he did. That's the part that still unsettles me. Back then, he was 39. Married. Respected. The kind of teacher students trusted. He was never inappropriate. Never crossed a line. If anything, he was stricter with me than anyone else. Which somehow made it worse. Because I had the biggest crush of my life on him. And it wasn't just a stupid teenage thing. It was the way he listened to me like I mattered. The way he'd lean against his desk, arms crossed, really considering my arguments. The way his voice softened when we talked about writing like it was something sacred. At 17, I didn't have the language for what I was feeling. I just knew I stayed after class longer than I needed to. I just knew I replayed our conversations at night. I just knew that when he stood too close while reviewing my essay drafts, my pulse wouldn't settle for hours. And I hated myself for it. Because he was my teacher. Because he was straight. Because he was married. Because even thinking about him that way felt wrong. So I buried it. Graduated. Left town. Built a life. And told myself it was just a phase. Sitting across from him now, I realized it hadn't been. Not entirely. "So," he said after a pause, stirring his coffee even though it didn't need stirring. "Are you living back in the city?" "Yeah. About a year now." He nodded slowly. "I wasn't sure if you'd ever come back." That was an odd thing to say. "Why?" He held my gaze for a beat too long. "You seemed like someone who needed distance." "Distance from what?" "From this town? From him?" I swallowed. "Yeah," I admitted. "I probably did." There it was again, that careful silence. The kind he used to give students when he wanted them to say more. Only now I wasn't a student. and he wasn't grading my vulnerability. "I'm glad you're doing well, Enrique," he said, and it sounded real, not polite. Real. "Are you?" I asked before I could stop myself. The question hung heavier than I intended. He blinked slightly, like I'd surprised him. "Am I what?" "Doing well." For a second, I saw something shift behind his eyes. Not teacher, not authority, just a man. "It's different," he said slowly. "Life is different now." He didn't mention his wife. I didn't ask, but I noticed the absence of a ring on his finger. And he noticed me noticing. His hand curled slightly, like he'd just realized it was visible on the table. We both looked away at the same time. The air felt tighter. Not inappropriate. Not exactly, but charged. Because here's the thing no one tells you about growing up. Age can erase legal boundaries, can erase job titles, it can erase power structures on paper, but it doesn't erase memory. And I still remembered sitting in his classroom, watching his hands move as he explained metaphor. I still remembered wondering what it would feel like if he ever looked at me the way he looked at certain passages in books, like they mattered. Now he was looking at me like that, and we both knew it. He cleared his throat. "Would you like to have dinner sometime?" he asked. Simple question. Adult. Normal. Except it wasn't normal. Not for us. Not with the ghost of that classroom sitting between us. I leaned back slightly, studying him. "Dinner," I repeated. He nodded, but there was tension in his jaw now. Yes, as two adults. Catching up. The fact that he felt the need to clarify that made my pulse spike. Two adults. Not teacher and student. Not mentor and kid. Just Enrique and Frederick. I should have hesitated. I should have made a joke. I should have said maybe. Instead, I said, "Okay." And the second the word left my mouth, I knew this wasn't just catching up. This was reopening something neither of us had ever dared to name. And I wasn't sure if that made it better, or more dangerous. The entire week leading up to dinner, I felt 17 again, which was ridiculous because my life had nothing in common with 17 anymore. I had meetings stacked across my calendar, emails that multiplied overnight, and a sink that never seemed empty no matter how often I washed dishes. I dated. I'd been in relationships that were simple, uncomplicated, and completely unrelated to classrooms or power dynamics. And yet the idea of sitting across from Frederick in a dim restaurant made my stomach twist like I was sneaking out past curfew. We texted during the week. Carefully. Thoughtfully. "Thursday at 7 works for me. I know a quiet place near the river." Quiet. Of course he would choose quiet. Frederick had always preferred spaces where conversation mattered more than noise. The night of the dinner, I stood in front of my closet longer than I wanted to admit. I didn't want to look like I was trying to impress him, but I also didn't want to look careless. Eventually I settled on dark jeans and a black shirt that fit well without announcing itself. When I arrived, he was already there. He stood the moment he saw me. That small gesture hit me harder than it should have. Not performative, not exaggerated. Just instinctive courtesy that felt unmistakably Frederick. "You look good," he said. No qualifiers. No commentary about how much I'd grown or changed. Just good. "You too," I answered and meant it. He looked softer than he had in school. The constant alertness I associated with teaching was gone, replaced by something quieter, more inward, like he had learned how to exhale. Dinner started easily. Wine helped. Books, work, the way the city kept rebuilding itself faster than anyone could emotionally keep up with. But beneath the conversation sat something heavier, waiting. Halfway through our second glass, he set his fork down. "Can I ask you something?" The tone sent a familiar ripple through me. "Sure." He held my gaze. "Did you know you were different from the other students?" I let out a slow breath. "Different how?" "You watched people like you were trying to understand them completely." A pause. "You watched me like that." The air shifted. "And did that bother you?" I asked. It concerned me, because it meant boundaries, responsibility, risk. I nodded once. "I had a crush on you." There was no dramatic buildup, no embarrassment creeping into my voice, just truth finally spoken out loud. His breath caught almost imperceptibly. "I suspected," he admitted. "You were careful." "I had to be." We sat with that for a moment, years of restraint condensed into a few quiet sentences. I was a kid, I said. Yes. And you were my teacher. Yes. Neither of us moved. And now? I asked softly. He leaned back, buying himself space to answer honestly. Now you are a grown man across from me, and I hold no authority over you. That's the technical answer. A faint smile touched his mouth. The honest one is that I have thought about you more times than was appropriate. Something in my chest tightened not from shock, but recognition. You never crossed a line, I said. No, and I'm glad. His shoulders loosened slightly. Relief, maybe. Silence settled, but it wasn't awkward. It felt like the pause after finally naming something that had existed unspoken for years. Are you divorced? I asked gently. Yes, for years. The missing ring made sense now. I avoided your graduation party, he added quietly. I blinked. Why? Because I realized that day you were no longer only my student. And that scared you. Yes, he said. It still does. The honesty in his voice stripped the moment of any fantasy. This wasn't a forbidden story unfolding dramatically. It was two people navigating the echo of what had once been. You're not my teacher anymore, I said. I know. And I'm not 17. I know that too. So what are we afraid of? He considered that. The echo, he said finally. That word lingered between us long after it was spoken. Later, outside the restaurant, the river air was sharp enough to make me inhale deeper than usual. Streetlights painted soft halos across the sidewalk, reflections trembling on the dark water nearby. For a moment the world narrowed to shared breath and quiet certainty. When we pulled apart, neither of us stepped away immediately. Because even standing there, calm settling back into the night around us, I could feel the complexity still humming beneath everything. The past, the echo, the fragile newness of whatever we were beginning. And as we walked slowly along the river afterward, silence companionable between us, I realized something gentle but irreversible had shifted. Not dramatic, not reckless, just the quiet understanding that some connections don't disappear with time. They wait. The first time I went to Frederick's apartment, I stood outside the building for a full minute before going in. The last time I'd been alone with him in a private space, I was 17, sitting across from his desk during office hours, pretending my questions about Kafka weren't just excuses to stay a little longer. That memory hovered somewhere behind my ribs as I stared up at the windows of his building. Now I was 30, holding a bottle of wine like any normal adult visiting someone they were seeing. That difference mattered. At least I needed it to. He opened the door before I could knock twice. Hey, he said softly. No formal greeting. No distance. Just me standing there, suddenly aware of how ordinary and significant this moment felt at the same time. Hey! I stepped inside. The apartment was exactly what I expected and nothing like it at the same time. Bookshelves lining entire walls. Clean surfaces without feeling sterile. Warm pools of light instead of overhead brightness. No framed wedding photos. No artifacts of a shared life that had once existed. It felt like a place rebuilt, intentionally quiet after noise. Wine? He asked. Sure. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. We hovered for a moment in the kitchen, orbiting each other in small movements. Him reaching for glasses, me setting the bottle down. He handed me a glass, and our fingers grazed, lingering a fraction longer than practicality required. Are you okay? He asked. It wasn't loaded, not probing, just careful. I am, I said. Are you? A faint exhale left him. Trying to be. I watched him from the corner of my eye, the way he leaned forward, forearms resting on his knees, posture attentive even in silence. I remembered that position from the classroom, the subtle shift that meant he was listening fully. It struck me then how deeply his presence had imprinted itself on me without either of us choosing it. You're thinking, he said. You always know. A small smile curved his mouth. Occupational hazard. I turned toward him. Can I ask you something honest? You can. When we kissed the other night, what were you feeling? His expression didn't close off. If anything, it became more present, as though he were weighing each word before letting it exist between us. Relief, he said. The answer caught me off guard. Relief. Yes. His gaze held mine. That it didn't feel wrong. The words settled heavily in the quiet room. Did you think it would? I asked. I was afraid it might. Not because of you. Because of what it represents. I understood. Not the age difference. Not really. 11 years wasn't insurmountable. It was the history, the imbalance that once existed, even if it no longer did. I don't want this to be you finishing something that started back then, he said. It's not, I replied too quickly. He noticed the speed, but not with suspicion, with care. You're sure? I drew in a breath that felt like sorting through years of memory. I won't pretend my crush on you didn't shape me, and I continued before the moment could tip into discomfort. But I've loved other men since then. Built things. Lost things. This isn't me chasing a memory. Silence stretched, not tense but thoughtful. And you? I asked. Are you trying to rewrite something? He leaned back, rubbing a hand over his mouth. No. If anything, I'm trying not to. That answer held more weight than reassurance ever could. I don't want you to feel like I ever had power over this, he said. You did, I answered gently, watching the immediate flicker in his eyes. Back then. Not now. He searched my face for resentment and found none. I never meant to, I know. And I did. He had been careful in ways I only understood fully as an adult. That's part of why I respected you, I said. You could have blurred things. You didn't. Something unguarded moved through his expression. I cared about you, he said simply. The present tense shift when he added, and I care about you now. Frederick had existed in my memory as a figure framed by fluorescent classroom light and unfinished sentences. Sitting beside him now, in the quiet of his living room, that image loosened its grip. He was no longer an idea suspended in adolescence. He was a man beside me, breathing the same air, navigating the same uncertainty. And as that realization settled gently in my chest, I understood that whatever we were building would not be a continuation of the past. It would be something new, shaped not by who we had been to each other, but by who we were choosing to be now. Just thinking. Dangerous activity. I smiled into his shoulder. I'm trying to figure out why this feels so normal. He paused, the small movement of his hand stopping before it resumed again. Slower this time. Does it worry you? He asked. A little. He shifted so he could see my face, his expression attentive in that familiar way that once made me overanalyze every word I said. Because for years you existed in a separate category, I explained. Untouchable. Almost symbolic. And now you're a guy whose couch is slightly too firm and who drinks unnecessarily expensive wine. His laugh was quiet but genuine, vibrating through his chest where my cheek rested. I feel honored. But then the humor softened into something more thoughtful. I understand, he said. You were never symbolic to me, but you were carefully contained. That phrase lingered in the air between us. Carefully contained. It sounded lonely in a way I hadn't expected. I think I was scared of you, he added. That pulled me upright. Me? Yes. He met my gaze calmly. You felt deeply. You noticed things. And you looked at me like you were trying to understand me, not just learn from me. I didn't have a defense for that because it was true. So I kept distance, he continued, for your sake. And mine. I nodded slowly. I'm glad you did. Relief flickered across his face, subtle but unmistakable. But I also spent years wondering, I admitted. Wondering what? If I imagined it. The quiet stretched. That there was something there, I clarified. Frederick held my gaze for a long moment before answering. You didn't imagine it. No dramatics. No heavy confession. Just truth offered gently, like something fragile being set down between us. I exhaled, tension I hadn't realized I carried loosening in my chest. That's weirdly comforting, I said. He smiled and we fell back into silence. The comfortable kind where nothing needs to be performed, where presence alone feels like enough. Eventually I sat up, running a hand through my hair. I should probably go. He didn't argue, didn't ask me to stay, just nodded in understanding that felt almost like respect for the decision before I'd fully explained it. Okay. We walked to the door together, the hallway light softer than the living room behind us. I slipped my jacket on while he leaned lightly against the wall, watching me with an expression that felt steady rather than uncertain. Thank you, he said. For what? for trusting me enough to be here. I'll see you soon? He asked, hopeful, not demanding. Yeah, I said, and I meant it. The walk home felt slightly surreal. The city hadn't changed. Buses sighed at stops, laughter spilled from bar patios, streetlights hummed overhead, but something internal had shifted, rearranged into a shape I didn't fully understand yet. The biggest realization wasn't about attraction or nostalgia. It was about agency. I wasn't chasing a memory or trying to correct some unfinished version of myself. I was building something new with someone who happened to exist in my past, and that distinction felt quietly important. Still, doubt crept in the next morning, soft but persistent. Not about Frederick, about whether I would eventually question my own motives. His text arrived before that thought could settle too deeply. I hope you got home safe. Simple, uncomplicated. I smiled at my phone before answering, the ease of that reaction surprising me more than anything else had so far. Later, when I met Mateo for coffee and watched him study my face with immediate suspicion, I realized how visible this shift must have been. Do you feel small? He asked at one point. No. Do you feel pressured? No. Do you feel like you could walk away? Yes. He leaned back, satisfied. Then the only question is whether you want to stay. That question followed me home, echoing softly as evening settled outside my windows. When Frederick called that night instead of texting, the sound of his voice felt grounding rather than destabilizing. Ordinary conversation about a museum exhibit, meeting times, practical details, small plans that belonged firmly in the present. After we hung up, I sat for a while in the quiet of my apartment, phone resting beside me, the city humming beyond the glass. I still didn't have certainty, but certainty no longer felt necessary, because whatever this was, it wasn't living in memory or speculation. It was unfolding slowly, shaped by choices made in real time, by conversations that replaced assumptions, by pauses that made room for trust to exist. And as that realization settled gently into me, I understood that moving forward didn't require complete clarity, only willingness. The museum date felt dangerously normal. That was the unsettling part. We met outside just before sunset, the sky washed in pale orange, the glass facade reflecting the city in fractured pieces. Frederick stood near the steps with his hands in his coat pockets, dark wool coat buttoned neatly, charcoal scarf tucked in with that effortless precision he always had. When he saw me, his expression softened immediately. There it was again. Not teacher, not authority, just warmth. You made it, he said. I like art. I'm not a monster. A quiet chuckle escaped him, the tension between us easing in a way that felt earned rather than automatic. We fell into step beside each other as we entered, shoulders brushing occasionally in the lobby's soft light. The exhibit was contemporary. Abstract pieces layered with texture and restraint, bold without being chaotic. It gave us something to look at that wasn't each other, which helped. At one canvas, deep blues carved through with violent streaks of white, Frederick stopped longer than usual. What do you see? He asked. I smirked. You really can't turn it off, can you? Turn what off? The literature teacher thing. His lips curved faintly. Occupational hazard. I stepped closer to the painting. I see restraint, I said slowly, like someone trying very hard not to explode. He studied it a moment longer. I see release, he replied quietly. After too much restraint. The words settled between us. Not about paint, about history. We didn't comment on it directly, but something shifted, not heavy, just aware. As we moved through the exhibit, conversation unfolded in small confessions. He told me about attempting to learn piano after his divorce and quitting out of frustration. I admitted I once moved across the country for someone who didn't love me back. Each story measured. Equal. No imbalance. In a quieter gallery, our hands brushed at the same time. This time, neither of us pretended it was accidental. Our fingers intertwined slowly. Public. Intentional. The simplicity of it tightened something in my chest. Not fear of being seen, but the symbolism of it. No secrecy. No hiding. Just two men at a museum holding hands. And still, the ghost lingered faintly. I felt it when an older couple passed us with polite smiles. I felt it when Frederick adjusted his posture unconsciously, the same straightening he used to do walking school hallways. After we left, we wandered toward the river. The air had cooled, and without thinking, I stepped closer. His arm slid around my shoulders easily, instinctively. It should have felt uncomplicated. Instead, I found myself studying him from the side. "You're doing it again," he said quietly. "Doing what?" Thinking too loudly. I huffed a breath. "Sorry. Don't apologize." We stopped at the railing overlooking the water, city lights shimmering across the surface. "Talk to me," he said. Honesty had carried us this far. I didn't want to abandon it now. "Do you ever worry what people would think?" I asked. He didn't play confused. "Yes. About us. Yes. Does it bother you?" He turned fully toward me, leaning lightly against the railing. "It would bother me if you felt judged," he said carefully. "It doesn't bother me for myself." That answer landed deeper than I expected. "You don't care if people assume things?" "I care if it hurts you," he clarified. "Not if it inconveniences me." My throat tightened slightly. "That's not exactly what I meant," I admitted. "I meant, do you ever feel like it looks wrong?" There it was. The fear underneath the question. He didn't look away. "Enrique," he said steadily, "you were a student. I was your teacher. That is part of our history." He didn't flinch from it. But history is not the same as present reality. If we had crossed lines back then, this would be wrong. We hadn't. If you were still 17, this would be wrong. I wasn't. If I were still in a position of authority over you, this would be wrong. He wasn't. He stepped closer. But we are two adults who met again by chance. The firmness in his tone felt grounding, not defensive. "And if anyone ever implies otherwise," he added quietly, "I will be the first to make it clear that nothing happened under my watch." That note of resolve carried something protective in it. Not over me, but beside me. I exhaled. "I don't feel manipulated," I said. "I don't want you to ever feel that way. I don't feel small." His shoulders eased slightly. "I don't feel like I owe you anything." "Good. And I don't feel like you're trying to relive something." Faint smile. "I'm far too tired to relive high school." I laughed, tension dissolving. After a moment, he brushed a strand of hair back from my forehead. A simple gesture that made my pulse jump. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yeah. If we hadn't known each other back then, if we had just met now, would you still want this?" The vulnerability in that question surprised me. I took my time answering. "I think I would have noticed you," I said carefully. A flicker of amusement touched his expression. "That's diplomatic." "I think I would have been intrigued," I clarified. "But I don't know if it would have been this intense." He nodded slowly. "That makes sense. Does that scare you?" "No," he said. "It means we have layers." Layers. That felt right. This wasn't a blank slate romance. It was something built on foundations that had existed before, but were being reinforced consciously now. Complicated didn't necessarily mean wrong. "Enrique." "Yes. We don't have to solve the philosophy of this tonight." I smiled. Occupational hazard. Standing there with him under the cold evening air, I realized something subtle but important. The past wasn't a trap. It was context. And context didn't have to control the outcome. For the first time since this began, I stopped scanning for warning signs and let the present be enough. Just him. Just me. Just the quiet decision to keep walking forward together. The first crack didn't come from us. Came from someone else. 2 weeks after the museum date, Frederick and I were at a small wine bar near his apartment. Late enough that the crowd had thinned, the lighting low and forgiving. Our knees touched beneath the table, his thumb brushing idly over my knuckles, while I talked about a disastrous manuscript I was editing. Comfortable. Easy. Then his hand went still. Not tense. Just still. I followed his gaze. Across the bar stood a woman in her mid-40s, watching us with unmistakable recognition. Frederick's ex-wife. I knew before he said anything. The resemblance was subtle but there. The same composed posture, the same observant eyes that missed nothing. "She's Claire," he said quietly. I figured. He didn't let go of my hand. That mattered. Claire approached deliberately, heels measured against the floor. No drama. No raised voice, just calm inevitability. Frederick, she said evenly. Claire. Her eyes shifted to me. And you must be Enrique. My stomach dipped. She knew my name. Frederick's thumb pressed slightly into my skin. Grounding, not possessive. Yes, I said, steady enough. Her gaze lingered, not hostile but analytical. It's nice to finally meet you, she said. Finally. There it was. The implication neither of us had voiced until now. Frederick straightened subtly. Claire, it's fine, she said lightly. I just didn't realize the reunion would be quite so literal. Not cruel. Just precise. There was never anything inappropriate, Frederick said firmly. I know, she replied. And she did. I could hear it. After a few more careful pleasantries, she excused herself, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the room had before. Frederick ran a hand over his face. I should have prepared you for that possibility. You didn't know she'd be here. No. But I knew eventually someone from my old life would see us. I studied him. Did she know? I asked. About your crush? Yes. He hesitated. I told her once. After you graduated. My chest tightened unexpectedly. Why? Because I felt guilty. The word landed wrong. Guilty of what? Of noticing, he said quietly. I never acted on it. But I wasn't blind. And I hated that part of myself. Silence pressed in around us. I didn't want to be that man, he added. That man. You weren't, I said firmly. He held my gaze. I know that logically. But desire doesn't feel logical when you're responsible for someone's safety. Safety. That reframed everything. At 17, I had only felt longing. I hadn't considered what it meant for him to carry the weight of boundaries. You told her because you didn't want secrets, I said slowly. Yes. And she thought you had feelings? She thought I was struggling with something I didn't want to name. That felt painfully accurate. And now? I asked. He looked tired for a second. Now I'm not struggling, he said. Now I'm choosing. The distinction settled between us. Claire hadn't introduced doubt. She'd introduced perspective. The outside world existed. History existed. Other people had watched pieces of this from angles I hadn't considered. Are you embarrassed? He asked gently. No. Uncomfortable. Yes. That's fair. We sat quietly, letting the weight redistribute itself. Then I asked the question that had been forming since she said finally. Did you ever love her? Yes. No hesitation. And do you still? A pause. Not in the way that belongs to a marriage. Honest. Not defensive. And she knows about us now. She knows I'm seeing someone, he said. She can connect the rest. Does it bother you? That she might assume something? He considered. No. Because I know the truth. Still, Claire's presence lingered in my thoughts. Not as accusation as reminder. Frederick, I said slowly. If we had run into each other when I was 22 instead of 30, would you have said yes? He didn't rush the answer. I don't know, he said finally. Honest. At 22, you were still becoming yourself. I might have worried you were chasing something unresolved. And now you look at me like you're evaluating a partner, not idolizing a teacher. That hit harder than I expected. Because he was right. Back then, I would have accepted anything just to be chosen. Now I was choosing too. I don't want to be a midlife revelation, I admitted. You're not. I don't want to be proof that some old tension finally paid off. He squeezed my hand gently. You're a man I met twice in one lifetime. That sentence settled deep in my chest. Not destiny. Not scandal. Timing. As we left the wine bar, the air outside felt sharper. The city moved around us, indifferent to our internal negotiations. Frederick reached for my hand again without hesitation. Public. Unapologetic. This time, when our fingers intertwined, I didn't feel exposed. Claire's presence hadn't broken us. It had clarified something. The past wasn't a secret waiting to be revealed. It was context. And context didn't automatically equal corruption. We walked in silence for a while, our steps unhurried. I don't regret telling her, he said eventually. I'm glad you did, I replied. Why? Because it means you were already choosing integrity back then. He glanced at me, something softening in his expression. That was the only option. No, I said quietly. It wasn't. It was the right one. He didn't answer right away. And in that quiet, I realized something important. The crack hadn't exposed weakness. It had tested the structure. And the structure held. By the time we reached his building, my thoughts felt steadier. Not resolved, but steadier. We didn't need to erase the past to justify the present. We just needed to be honest about both. Standing there on the sidewalk, city lights reflecting faintly in his glasses, I felt something settle inside me. This wasn't unfinished business. It wasn't delayed gratification. It was two versions of ourselves meeting again when it was finally safe. And safety, I was beginning to understand, wasn't the absence of desire. It was the presence of choice. After Claire, something shifted. Not explosively. Not in a way that made good drama. There was no fight, no accusation, no sudden coldness. It was quieter than that. We became more deliberate, as if both of us understood that whatever this was couldn't survive on chemistry and careful conversations alone. It had to survive ordinary life. A few days after the wine bar, I invited Frederick to my apartment for the first time. That felt important. Until then, we'd mostly existed in his space or in curated public settings, museums, restaurants, river walks, places where everything felt intentional. My apartment was smaller, lived in, books stacked in uneven piles, a half-finished manuscript open on my desk, laundry I'd forgotten to fold, a life mid-sentence. He stepped inside slowly, taking it in without judgment. "I like it," he said. "You're just being polite." "No," he replied gently. "It feels like you." That shouldn't have landed as deeply as it did. We ordered takeout and ate cross-legged on the floor because my dining table was buried under papers. He asked about my edits. I asked about a lecture he'd recently given at a community center. The conversation wasn't charged. It was easy, equal. At one point, he stood and wandered toward my bookshelf. "You kept it," he said. I looked over. He was holding my old copy of The Brothers Karamazov, the one he'd written in after graduation. "Never stop asking difficult questions." I stood slowly. "I almost threw it away once," I admitted. His brow creased slightly. "Why?" "Because I thought if I let go of everything connected to you, I'd move on faster." A quiet pause settled between us. "And did you?" he asked softly. "No," he nodded once, thoughtful. "That book wasn't the reason you stayed," he said. I stepped closer. "No," I agreed. "It wasn't." He placed it back carefully, not ceremoniously, just respectfully. "Enrique," he said, voice steady, "if this ever starts to feel like it's rewriting your youth instead of building your present, you tell me." "I will," I said. "And I need you to promise the same." "I promise." No grand vows. No cinematic confession. Just boundaries spoken plainly. A week later, at a bookstore event, we ran into one of my former classmates. Recognition flickered across his face. Confusion, realization, calculation. "You two know each other?" he asked. Frederick didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said calmly. "We do." The implication hovered in the air. This time, I didn't feel defensive. Didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. I reached for Frederick's hand. He took mine without hesitation. No performance. No justification. Just contact. The past wasn't erased. It wasn't denied. It was acknowledged and left where it belonged. Because here's what I finally understood. When I was a boy, I admired a man who treated me with respect. When I became a man, I met him again. And this time we stood on equal ground. Not teacher and student. Not authority and admiration. Just two men who met twice in one lifetime. The echo never fully disappears. But it doesn't have to control the room. Sometimes it just becomes part of the architecture. A reminder of what was once fragile and what is now chosen. And standing there in the bookstore, fingers intertwined, I realized something steady and certain. This wasn't unfinished business. It was finished boundaries. And a beginning we had both stepped into with our eyes open.